Welcome to this retrospective slash review for Super Ghouls and Ghosts. And just going to jump right in to my thoughts on the game and how it basically capped off my 3-game run for the early Ghouls and Ghosts, or Ghosts and Goblins games, whichever words you want to use. They changed the name of the series in between the first and second game. But anyway, I think right off the bat, the most obvious thing about Super Ghouls and Ghosts is the graphics are improved over the last game, Ghouls and Ghosts. Now, I do want to clarify that just a little bit. I actually like the graphics for Ghouls and Ghosts on the Sega Genesis. And so when I say the graphics are improved, they truly are improved compared to the Genesis, but I don't want to take away from how good the Genesis game looked. It looked very good, but you could definitely tell with the newer hardware, the Super Nintendo, the much more diverse color palette, that they're able to do a lot more graphically with this game. And I will say that I've always liked the Super Nintendo music chip as well. So musically was also a pretty decent step up from the Genesis game as well. Another thing to point out also with Super Ghouls and Ghosts, this is the first game that was not originally an arcade game that was converted to a home system. So this would be the first truly original Ghosts and Goblins game for home consoles. But let me go ahead, like I said, the graphics and music were both improved. Having said that, however, that does come at a cost, which was pretty obvious during my playthrough for sure. Basically, there was many times there was a lot of slowdown on the game. Why would you just stand there and die? Whatever. There's a lot of slowdown on the game because of the increased graphical capability. And the Super Nintendo, especially a lot of early Super Nintendo games, had that issue where it would slow down when there's just a lot of stuff on the screen. Super Ghouls and Ghosts is no different than a lot of those early Super Nintendo games. And so, I mean, I think there is an option to overclock the CPU that you can utilize in the emulator, but I didn't do that because I wanted to keep it a fairly accurate representation of how the game would work on an actual Super Nintendo. And to be fair, to some extent, the slowdown can be considered beneficial at times, especially when you're starting to get overwhelmed by enemies and projectiles and things of that nature. So, I mean, there are positives and negatives to the slowdown factor, but it is definitely noticeable, which is something you can't say for the Genesis version of the game. The Genesis version of the game was actually very fluid. I don't think I ever experienced any slowdowns whatsoever with the Genesis game. So for a slight downgrade in visual quality, you got a much more fluid gameplay experience on the Genesis. So take that how you will, basically. As a lot of people back in the day would say, it's probably due to all that blast processing on the Genesis. But anyway, so that's just the more obvious aspect of Super Ghouls and Ghosts compared to Ghouls and Ghosts. Still a very good game on that front, so I don't want to take anything away from it there. Now, gameplay. This game does control very well. I will say that. It does control well, but there's definitely one thing I really, really missed in this game that was no longer there, that was in the Genesis game, and that's the ability to shoot up. I mean, shooting down is not something I enjoyed doing a lot in the Genesis game, but, I do kind of miss the fact that I can't shoot down in this game either. So I think from a gameplay perspective, there's a lot of additions to this game which enhance the gameplay, but at the same time, I just felt the Genesis game probably controlled a little bit better, even with a relatively limited, uh, I guess what would you say, items compared to the Super Nintendo game. Because in Genesis, all you have is the gold armor, and with this game, you have the bronze armor, then you have the gold armor, the shield, which is about dang worthless because it can't block a dang thing. That's beside the point. You do have a lot of extra weapons in this game and as Super Ghouls and Ghosts, and one of them, the crossbow, is a very, I'd almost say, essential upgrade for you to be able to get past this game, especially since you can't shoot up. You can only shoot left or right, basically, which I definitely feel that was a step backwards. For whatever reason, they decided to remove the ability to shoot up. I don't know why they did that. But the crossbow was a good addition. The dagger, of course, is still very good. But then there's just a lot of weapons in this game that aren't very good. I forget what the weapon's called before it becomes a shuriken, but whatever that shuriken weapon is, I think it's just garbage. Absolute garbage. I don't know what's worse, it or the axe, or the fire. I mean, or torch, whatever. Those all three weapons are pretty bad. The scythe's pretty not very good either, and the lance kind of seems a little bit lacking as well. So, I mean, when it really comes down to it, the only weapons I really liked in this game were the crossbow and the dagger. Outside of those two weapons, and even the goddess bracelet is kind of not very good, really. So yeah, there's a lot of extra weapons and there's a lot of neat little abilities and whatnot they could do, but at the end of the day, I didn't really feel like using barely any of them, other than say the like I said, a crossbow and the dagger, and those are good weapons, and I definitely liked the upgraded attack that those weapons possess. Actually, in a way, the crossbow kind of went down a little bit, except when you're dealing with gargoyles, then it wasn't quite as good as it was in its normal form, but the upgraded dagger was just absolutely amazing. So, from a equipment perspective, is a little bit of a mixed bag. I think some of the weapons were good, but then a lot of them were just not very good, to be completely and totally honest with you. So a little more variety, but at the cost of actual utility, to say the least. And I think one thing that I will definitely say about this game is it is much more challenging than the Genesis game. Easily. It is definitely more challenging than the Genesis game. I thought the Genesis game was, quite frankly, a little bit easy compared to this one. Now, granted, I was playing on practice mode, and that's one thing this game does have over the Genesis. It has 4 difficulty modes as compared to 2 in the Genesis. So twice the difficulty modes, which is a good improvement for sure. And to be fair, I probably could have played this on beginner mode, which is beginner mode, easy mode, practice mode, whatever you want to call it. I could have played it on that difficulty. I just didn't feel like doing that. Kind of felt like I'd be insulting myself by doing that to a certain extent. So, if I had had the option to put it on normal mode on the Genesis version, I would have, rather than professional. And that's funny because this game actually also has a professional difficulty. So I find that kind of interesting that both games have a professional difficulty. That being said, the game is noticeably more challenging, but I will say that I did pretty well on my second playthrough or second cycle, I should say, of the game. I did a lot better than I thought I would, really, especially on a lot of these early stages. So adjusting to the way the game is and plays, that was probably the biggest thing I had to do, is just get adjusted to the way the game plays. And after I did that, I was able to, I wouldn't say it was easy, but I was able to get through the first several levels of the game with minimal difficulty on my second playthrough. Now, granted, that's because I avoided getting the goddess bracelet, because I knew exactly where all the treasure chests was. And that's because I actually discovered them. I didn't use a cheat guide or anything. I discovered where all the treasure chests were in the last level. I was like, I could pick up the magic bracelet whenever I want to. So that being said, I was able to get through those first 6 levels pretty easily on my second playthrough. So it is something you can learn, to say the least. You can learn the patterns and all the other nuances of the levels, but it takes a little more time to figure things out in this game than it did in the Genesis game. Except for level 7. They don't care about your feelings in level 7, and especially when you're trying to beat it and get the goddess bracelet at the end and make it to the boss. You know, I probably spent a very large amount of time trying to beat that last level the correct way, the way I would have done it on a normal Super Nintendo, before I said, you know what, I spent enough time on this one stupid level. I'm done. I'm just going to do a save state when I get to the 2 bosses at the end there, right before the 2 bosses. And then from there, basically, once I figured out how to use the goddess bracelet properly against them, I was able to beat them. I wouldn't say easily, but I did pretty decently eventually. But it's just a matter of trying to get through the whole level and then change your mindset of how to use that weapon to combat those 2 guys. I don't know, for some reason that just didn't click with me. It took me such a long time for that to click. Kind of like the original Ghosts and Goblins, though, the final battle, I mean, okay, it wasn't as absolutely simple as it was in Ghosts and Goblins, but it was pretty ridiculously easy. In fact, the majority of bosses in this game were actually pretty easy. Most of the bosses, compared to the levels to get to them, were almost a joke, to be completely honest. So, I mean, there is that aspect. Granted, most of the time I had the correct weapon that I needed for those bosses, which is either crossbow or the dagger. You have the right weapon, the bosses are kind of a joke. And that's kind of an interesting aspect of the game, to say the least. But I will say that playing it through RetroArch, and I was using the MES and S core because like I said, I wanted to have an accurate depiction of a Super Nintendo, since I obviously don't have a Super Nintendo. I do have my Switch, as I've mentioned plenty of times, and you do have access to this game on the normal Switch Online, which is good. That it's just on the normal Switch Online, so if you have your normal subscription with that, you can play this game via the Switch. Now, I don't know how the MES and S emulator or core compares to the emulator on the Switch, but I have a feeling they're probably fairly similar. And I will say that for the most part, this emulator does a very good job playing the game, and the achievement set that is created for this game on Retro Achievements is actually really, really good, and does improve the replayability of this game drastically. So I definitely, like I said, for all these games, I think playing it via RetroArch or any of the other emulators that you can get achievements on, that definitely improves the replayability of these games immensely, because I don't really know if I would really want to come back to this game otherwise without those achievements as a incentive to continue to come back to them. Because, I mean, once you beat the game, those achievements are really what gives you the incentive to come back to it and play it. So I think that's just a great way of playing it. MES and S core worked really well. There is the SNES 9X core that you can use, but I didn't test that one out, so I don't know how well it is or how well it emulates this. The one odd thing about this game that I will say is, like, in the end credits scene after the final battle, where the character just fell to his death and the background music just completely and totally died. I'm guessing that was an emulator bug or something. I don't know what happened there. It was just really odd. Um, but other than that, I mean, that one small glitch, everything seemed to work really well from an emulation perspective. So yeah, I can't really fault the emulator at all, really, for the way the game played. I think it just did a great job there, and I'm sure the Switch emulator is just as good. So definitely worth playing. But I will say, from a fun aspect, this game was a little more frustrating, especially with that last level, compared to the Genesis version of Ghouls and Ghosts. And so I would probably dock this a little bit of points because it got to be more frustrating than fun there at the end, to the point where I'd say just heck with it. I'm going to use save states and get through this because it was getting frustrating after a while. Which I can't really say that was ever anything that I really worried too much about with the Genesis, except for that one battle prior to the next to last level. And that was pretty much on me why that one was as difficult as it was. I don't know. I mean, like I said, difficulty, I'm not going to actually, except for the last level, I can't really knock this game's difficulty too much because, like, I did do very well in my second playthrough. So it is something that you can get along, but getting there can be frustrating. So because there is a higher level of frustration involved with this game as compared to the Genesis one, I think that does hurt a little bit. The graphical slowdown is very noticeable and can be somewhat distracting at times. So that's a bit, even though it looks really good with everything, that is a little bit of a downside as well, and it hurts the fluidity of the game. So I still think this is a really good game. Don't get me wrong. I think it's a really good game, but I like the Genesis game better. And let me go ahead and also say, this is coming from a person who didn't have a Genesis growing up. I had a Nintendo and then a Super Nintendo. So I'm more familiar with those platforms. This is definitely not me being biased against the Super Nintendo. If anything, my bias is always against the Genesis, comparatively speaking. So I think the Genesis game just played better than the Super Nintendo one. You know, I can freely admit it. And but I can still say that this was a good game, and I'd give it a score of 85%. It's definitely very challenging, so if you're looking for a challenging game to play around Halloween time, this is definitely going to be right up your alley. I just would recommend probably using something like RetroArch and trying to get achievements, because that just puts the challenge into a better perspective and gives you more incentive to play the game. So anyway, that's my thoughts on Super Ghouls and Ghosts. I hope you give it a try. However you go out playing it, via the Switch or via emulation, however you get around playing it, definitely worth your time. And yeah, thank you for watching this video. I'll see y'all in the next one. Take care.